And the U.S. plans to bolster spending for research and development in technology and innovation. As CGTN White House correspondent Nathan King further explains.
The Endless Frontier Act is one of the many pieces of legislation making its way through the US Congress, aimed at either confronting or competing with China. This one is mostly about competition.
The competition isn't waiting.
The legislation just passed the Senate Energy and Commerce Committee will provide tens of billions of dollars of support in critical research grants in areas such as electric vehicle research, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, 5 and 6G telecommunications technology and rare earth metals. It would also focus on enhancing US manufacturing and domestic supply chains for the key industries of the future. There is rare bipartisan support in an otherwise deeply divided Washington, and an acknowledgement that China is ahead in many of these key technologies.
If America is actually to lead the world in the 21st century, we have to go on offense and invest in ourselves and give the world a clear alternative to what China presents.
The legislation would also aim to keep China out of critical research in the United States and would prevent US scientists from accepting exchange programs in China and even potentially working with Chinese counterparts. There is also a $50 billion drive to fund semiconductor research called the Chips for America Act. This may be folded into the Endless Frontier Act too. But there are divisions. Republicans are warning that the act may lead to the government instead of the market taking a leading role in research. Some have even accused Democrats of copying the Chinese model of strong state support. Semiconductor companies are also worried that billions of investment into certain types of chip technology could create winners and losers in the industry. They're also concerned about trying to produce too much supply domestically. Some Republicans also have problems with the establishment of new regional research hubs away from traditional centers of excellence. Democrats say investing in the 21st century should include those areas and ethnicities previously excluded from science and technology. The chair of the Senate committee called for differences to be cast aside.
Is the United States going to be able to come together?
Despite the debates here at the US Congress, it is clear that the Endless Frontier Act will probably come up for a vote on the full Senate floor as early as next week. And it's all but guaranteed that US President Joe Biden would sign it into law. It's about competition, but I can tell you that the atmosphere here isn't one of friendly competition. It's almost like an innovation arms race, aimed at keeping US technology at the top of the global pack and keeping China out. Nathan King, CGTN, outside US Congress.
Now, Andy Mork is joining us from Beijing to discuss more on this billion-dollar plan of the US, and he's a senior research fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Andy, welcome to Global Watch. First of all, why has the US decided to spend this huge amount of money to promote tech sector when the country is already a world leader?
Well, thanks for having me, Dongning. And I think that is exactly the reason why the U.S. Feels compelled to launch initiatives like this, is that because American leadership or hegemony rests on its technological superiority, and of course it has been top of the heap or king of the hill for quite a long time and hopes to maintain that status, and I think is very, very much afraid that if it loses its technology leadership, that other bad consequences for the U.S. that may or may not materialize, but certainly what it's afraid of will become reality.
Well, the act is said to be for preserving America's global leadership, as what you said, through the 21st century. How did technology emerge exactly as critical for U.S. national security and economic competitiveness then?
Well, what we can see is it really so far relates to ICT or information communication technologies. So whether we're talking about semiconductors, which are of course hardware that are the key components of everything from fighter aircraft to smartphones, and more we move into this Internet of Things, pretty much everything that we use in our lives. is very, very important, but to life sciences as well. We're seeing more the importance of gene editing, synthetic bio, that these are the critical technologies that the U.S. sees. And related to this is the supply chain as well, where we've seen a world that has moved perhaps too far towards just in time and now is rebalancing more towards just in case, meaning that there is a certain amount of resiliency, I think, that needs to be built into supply chains in the event there's a global pandemic, there's an earthquake, or even a regional power outage or a fire that can affect the supplies of key technology products.
And as our reporter Nathan King just said, that the eventual goal of this act is to phase China out. Do you agree?
Well, I think that this certainly would be self-defeating on the part of the U.S. for a couple of reasons. So China, of course, is not just an enormous country population-wise and economically, but the pace of development in China is unparalleled. And many of the leading STEM graduate students and researchers come from China to study and work in the United States. So I think from a more abstract perspective, greater sharing and openness is conducive to faster technology advances, but in particular looking to block China or Chinese people and scientists and researchers is ultimately self-defeating.
Well, you mentioned some of the China's advantages in technology development. What are the challenges?
Well, I think some of the challenges, of course, have been the decades-long process that China's undergoing of both reform and opening. So moving from largely a state-led, SOE-centered economy that was also very resource-constrained, now, of course, to a much more advanced economic system. But there are growing pains, there are challenges, both systemic developments that need to be made, as well as greater education, greater targeted policies. Semiconductors, we know, is one, of course, that has become a priority lately, and that requires coordination of government capital, but also greater talent, whether that's development of talent in China or attracting talent from overseas, the right business models, et cetera. So there is a lot to do, but I think it's very promising.
All right, thank you very much, Andy Morg, Senior Research Fellow at the
having me.
Center for China and Globalization.